but not a single Democrat senator that I ever saw in this committee was willing to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland to account for flagrantly disregarding the federal criminal law, because the Biden administration agreed with the protesters and I think wanted those justices harassed at their home.
Welcome back to Conservative Call. I'm your host, and today we're diving into a Senate committee hearing that exposes everything wrong with our judicial system under the Biden administration. If you believe in constitutional integrity and judicial fairness, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because we're going to break down the corruption and double standards that are destroying our courts.
Make two brief observations. Number one, it is interesting as our Democrat colleagues defend these nationwide injunctions that neither of them made any reference to the fact that the number of nationwide injunctions issued in the first 4 months is greater than the entire 20th century and is greater than all of the nationwide injunctions issued against Bush, Obama, and Biden combined, nor did they address the disturbing fact that of the 40 universal injunctions that have been issued in the last 4 months, 35 of them came from the same 5 judicial districts. There is a reason for this. Blue state attorneys general and radical leftist groups are seeking out affirmatively radical judges who they know will impose their own policy preferences. If it were simply, as our Democrat colleagues said, judges following the law, then you wouldn't have to keep going to the same radical judges over and over and over again, because judges across the board should do that. But the litigants know exactly who the zealots are that are on the bench, and that's who they are seeking out. I will also point out that the discussion about the urgency of protecting the safety of judges. Listen, I agree. We should protect the safety of every federal judge, but it is interesting because my Democrat colleagues were utterly silent during 4 years of the Biden administration when you had violent mobs outside the homes of Supreme Court justices unhappy with the Supreme Court's ruling in Dobbs, and the Biden Justice Department refused to enforce federal law and protect the justices. And my Democrat colleagues were perfectly happy with Supreme Court justices being threatened if they disliked the rulings that were coming from the Supreme Court justices. Unlike my colleagues, I believe we should protect judges regardless of whether I agree with them or not. We should protect their safety. And every time you hear a Democrat senator talk about protecting judges from acts of violence, you ought to ask them, why did they not have a word to say about the Biden Justice Department allowing mobs to threaten the families and children of Supreme Court justices night after night after night, while Biden's Attorney General refused to follow the law? And with that, I'll recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Senator Durbin.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. They asked Winston Churchill after World War II.
Would you indulge me for a moment?
We indulge you every moment.
I appreciate that act of generosity. It's just something you said that I think is actually dangerous and should be addressed, and you're welcome. But when Judge Anderol was killed in New Jersey, the Republican colleagues in the Senate, their outpouring of support, their outpouring of concern, they're willing to work together on a bipartisan bill was extraordinary. It shows the truth of this institution. It's, despite some of the fiery rhetoric that you were sowing, we're really a bipartisan, working bipartisanship. Cornyn and Coons, after the incidents you're talking about, got together and actually passed a bill to better protect our Supreme Court justices, many of whom are friends of ours. You know, Gorsuch and I disagree on a lot of stuff. I knew his wife before he did. We studied together at Oxford. This implication that there was silence when there were threats on their people's houses is absolutely absurd. I remember the rhetoric and the comments, the concern from Coons. I actually distinctly remember you, Chairman, on more than once condemning those attacks on Republican-appointed jurists. To say things like that feeds just the partisanship in this institution and feeds the fiery rhetoric. And it's just plain not true. It's just plain not true. And I think you know that, but we can pull from the record from my colleagues in real time, literally days afterwards, condemning it. There's a lot of substantive things to say here, but to think that the lack of humanity when people's homes are being threatened was not in existence, I think that's unfair and really concerns me that you would say that in the way that you did.
Well, I thank my colleague from New Jersey. I will note, as John Adams observed, that facts are stubborn things. And it is existing federal law, 18 U.S.C. section 1507, that makes it a crime to protest at a judge's home. And the law provides whoever with the intent of interfering with, obstructing, or impeding the administration of justice, or with the intent or of influencing any judge, juror, witness, or court officer in the discharge of his duty, pickets or parades in or near a building housing a court of the United States, in or near a building or residence occupied or used by such judge, juror, witness, or court officer, or with such intent uses any sound truck or similar device or resorts to any other demonstration in or near any such building or residence, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 1 year or both. That is federal criminal law. Night after night after night, angry mobs were outside the Supreme Court justices' homes, and in the entire course of it, the Biden Justice Department prosecuted nobody. We had the Attorney General sitting at that table, and multiple Republican senators asked him, why are you not enforcing the law? What they are doing is a crime. And my friend from New Jersey said, it is a lie to say we, the Democrats, condone this. I would challenge, my friend, find a single Democrat senator on this committee holding the Attorney General to account for not enforcing this law. I was here at those hearings, and I do not recall a single Democrat senator saying to the Attorney General, you should arrest these people who are violating the law. You should protect the judges. I agree that there was general language against violence, but not a single Democrat senator that I ever saw in this committee was willing to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland to account for flagrantly disregarding the federal criminal law because the Biden administration agreed with the protesters and I think wanted those justices harassed at their home.
I really appreciate that you've now shifted the accusation you made earlier. Your accusation was that we were silent in the face of protests at Supreme Court justices' homes. Again, we joined together in a bipartisan way, not only to condemn that, but to pass legislation to extend round-the-clock security protection, literally days. It was introduced May 5th, passed the Senate in a bipartisan fashion on May 9th. So if you're saying that we didn't criticize Merrick Garland—
Did the Biden DOJ arrest a single person under this law?
You are now changing the—
No, that is what I said. That is what I said.
Again, I'll pull the record.
Did the Biden DOJ arrest even one?
Again.
The answer is no.
My point to you is the accusation that the Democrats on this committee do not care about the safety of federal judges. I did not interrupt you, sir. I would appreciate if you let me finish. I am sick and tired of hearing the kind of heated partisan rhetoric, which is one of the reasons why we have such divisions in this country. The attacks we see from the President of the United States of America trolling and dragging judges through is what we should be talking about, that puts people in danger. I'm simply taking issue with the claim that you made at the top that people on the Democratic side of the aisle do not care about the safety and the security of judges and said nothing. You said we were silent after people's houses were protested. That is a patent lie, sir. We were not silent. We took action. We've joined in a bipartisan way to protect those judges, as was done in a bipartisan way to protect a New Jersey judge after their horrific attack at their home. So I see you now trying to shift the debate to whether we talk to an attorney general. I'm simply taking issue with this accusation that somehow we Democrats are so bad because we don't call out threats to our judicial colleagues. And that is wrong. You could change the argument now that you want, but what you said was patently not true and was, in fact, a patent lie.
So I do enjoy the fact that my colleague from New Jersey raises his voice and says it's a patent lie and says he's doing so in defense of lowering the rhetoric. There is some irony to doing those two together. I'll point out that in the entire course of those remarks, Senator Booker did not dispute the central point I made, which is the Biden Justice Department arrested 0 people, prosecuted 0 people for violating the criminal law, and every Democrat senator on this committee was silent about it. And this was an ongoing pattern for months. And I would note also that the senator from New Jersey clutched his pearls about language threatening judges, and yet I do not recall a single Democrat senator of this committee saying a word when Chuck Schumer went to the steps of the Supreme Court and threatened the safety of the Supreme Court justices by name, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, and he said, "You have unleashed the whirlwind and you will pay the price." And not a single Democrat senator had a word to say about this. And so their outrage is selective. And I will give my colleague from New Jersey a chance to just answer a simple yes-no question. Should the Biden Justice Department have enforced the criminal law against protesting at a justice's home? Yes or no?
So the rank hypocrisy of Chuck Schumer apologizing the next day and you holding that standard for him and not for your president, who you actually rightfully described when you were running against him in a primary. I would love to run those tapes of how you perfectly talked about the danger of our president and his rhetoric. But now you are failing, in fact, blind to the very things you're accusing Chuck Schumer of. I don't think Donald Trump would know an apology if it hit him in the head. Never has said apologizing. So again, you are very, very, sir, very, very deep into the waters of hypocrisy in your criticisms of Chuck Schumer.
So let the record reflect that Spartacus did not answer the question and did not tell us whether the criminal law should be enforced, because he knows the answer is yes. And he knows that the Biden Department of Justice was being wildly political and partisan in refusing to enforce the law because they disagreed with the Supreme Court justices' rulings. I have also, in addition to Senator Durbin, who's given his opening statement, I have a written opening statement from Chairman Grassley. Without objection, that written statement is entered into the record, and I will now briefly introduce our distinguished witnesses. We have 3.
What we just witnessed in the Senate hearing is a masterclass in how the left manipulates our justice system while crying victim when they get called out. Senator Ted Cruz laid out the facts, and what he revealed should terrify every American who believes in the rule of law. Let me break down what actually happened here. In just 4 months, we saw more nationwide injunctions issued than in the entire 20th century. Think about that for a moment. More judicial interference in 4 months than in 100 years. And here's the kicker. 35 out of 40 of these injunctions came from the same 5 judicial districts. This isn't coincidence, folks. This is coordinated forum shopping by radical leftist groups who know exactly which activist judges will rubber stamp their agenda. Senator Cruz hit the nail on the head when he pointed out that if judges were simply following the law as Democrats claim, then litigants wouldn't need to keep running to the same radical judges over and over again. But they do, because they know these judges are political operatives in robes, not impartial arbiters of justice. Now here's where it gets really infuriating. When Cruz brought up the obvious hypocrisy about judicial safety, Senator Booker completely lost it. And why? Because Cruz exposed the truth about what happened during the Dobbs protests. For months, angry leftist mobs surrounded Supreme Court justices' homes, violating federal law 18 U.S.C. Section 1507. This is an opinion. This is black-letter law that makes it a federal crime to protest at a judge's residence. And what did the Biden Justice Department do? Absolutely nothing. 0 arrests, 0 prosecutions. They completely ignored federal criminal law because they agreed with the protesters. Attorney General Merrick Garland sat in front of this very committee and refused to enforce the law. Where was the Democratic outrage then? Booker tried to deflect by claiming Democrats supported legislation for judicial protection, but that's missing the entire point. The issue isn't whether they supported security measures after the fact. The issue is whether they demanded law enforcement when federal crimes were being committed in real time. And as Cruz pointed out, not a single Democrat on that committee held Garland accountable for his dereliction of duty. Then Booker had the audacity to bring up Chuck Schumer's threats against Justices Gorsuch and Kavanaugh. Remember when Schumer stood on the Supreme Court steps and said, "You have unleashed a whirlwind and you will pay the price"? That was a direct threat against sitting justices by the Senate Majority Leader, and Democrats said nothing. This is the pattern we see over and over again. When conservatives point out leftist overreach, we get accused of dangerous rhetoric. When leftists actually engage in dangerous rhetoric or ignore federal law, we get lectures about civility and bipartisanship. The forum shopping crisis Cruz identified represent a fundamental threat to our constitutional system. When radical groups can essentially guarantee favorable rulings by picking the right judge in the right district, we no longer have equal justice under law. We have a system where political connections and judicial activism trump constitutional principles. This is why judicial nominations matter so much. This is why the left fought so hard against originalist judges like Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett. They know that activist judges are their secret weapon for implementing policies they can't pass through legitimate democratic processes. The hypocrisy Senator Cruz exposed here goes to the heart of everything wrong with how Democrats approach law and order. They demand protection for themselves while allowing intimidation of conservative justices. They cry about threats to democracy while systematically corrupting our judicial system through forum shopping and political pressure. Every patriotic American needs to understand what's happening here. This isn't about partisan politics. This is about whether we're going to have a justice system based on the Constitution or one based on political convenience. The evidence is clear which side Democrats have chosen. The fact that Booker couldn't give a straight yes or no answer about whether federal law should be enforced tells you everything you need to know. When enforcing the law becomes a partisan issue, we're no longer operating under the rule of law. This hearing exposed a radical left strategy: pack the courts with activists, ignore laws they don't like, and cry victim when called out for their hypocrisy. It's a playbook they've been running for years, and it's time Americans wake up to what's happening. If you want to see more content exposing the left assault on our institutions, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell. Share this video with everyone who needs to understand how our justice system is being weaponized against constitutional principles. The mainstream media won't tell you this story, so it's up to channels like ours to get the truth out there.